Have you ever been on vacation, relaxing poolside, enjoying a mountain view, or in my case, face planting off a stand-up paddleboard? But you couldn't enjoy any of it because you were too busy being stressed out about work back home or figuring out how you're going to get to your next 10 stops on your vacation. Well, I guess the good news is you're not alone. And this isn't a you problem per se, this is a societal problem, especially in the US. People are wasting their vacation time and stressing themselves out in the process. So in this video, I'm going to share with you how to make the most out of your vacation by avoiding these 5 things I've blurred out in an obvious ploy to get you to keep watching. If you're new here, my name's Joe Baur. I'm an American-German travel writer and filmmaker who's been traveling pretty regularly over the past decade. I've lived in Costa Rica, wrote a book about it, and I've been in Germany for the past 8 years, making a mix of food and adventure films from Spain to Laos and just about everywhere in between. Well, not literally everywhere. That's just some light hyperbole to establish credibility with you. But you're smart, you get it. Now let's get back to the topic at hand. Americans don't take enough holiday. A 2019 study revealed that Americans wasted a record 768 million vacation days in 2018, a 9% increase from the year before. A more recent survey from Expedia declared that Americans are the worst globally at taking vacation. USA. Reasons cited included being too busy or feeling overwhelmed at the prospect of planning a vacation. Perhaps even worse, 19% of Americans said they save up vacation days for a vacation they don't ever end up going on. That's despite 65% of Americans saying they're vacation deprived. So what's the problem here? Why aren't Americans going on vacation? Unsurprisingly, work is to blame. In another recent study, 47% of Americans felt guilty taking a summer vacation and found it difficult to disconnect from work while on vacation. So no surprise, 54% of Americans end up working on their vacation because 59% can't switch off and 63% feel anxious if they don't check messages. It's no wonder because a whopping 86% of people said they received relaxation-disrupting phone calls and messages from colleagues while on vacation. Somehow even worse, 1 out of 4 participants in this survey said their boss demanded that they work while on vacation. That's the context, and I know it's very American-centric, but living in Germany for the past years, I've met plenty of people who have fallen victim to some of these things, especially the relaxation disrupting phone calls or messages from their boss or colleagues. So now let's dive into how to actually stop wasting time on your vacation, whether that's dealing with the stress of thinking about work while you're on vacation or dealing with the stress of planning your vacation, going on vacation, and just making sure everything goes smoothly. All right, number 1, thoroughly plan out your trip. I feel like we've kind of romanticized this Bourdainian travel style of just flying by the seat of your pants. I'm gonna show up in a destination and just let things happen to me. Things are gonna happen. It's gonna be unique. It's gonna be magical. I'm gonna find all these hidden gems, and it's gonna be a trip to remember. The thing is, though, if you really think about it, and I also have done this before, where I would watch Anthony Bourdain shows and feel like, oh, this is how I want to travel, meet the locals, eat the local food, and just really feel like I'm part of the city or whatever the destination is. But the thing is that if you really think about it, those shows were wildly planned through. They were thought through, they were planned, they were executed, they had schedules, they had places they had to be at a certain time, they had fixers on the ground who are planning everything so that Bourdain in this case could get that local experience. And I actually appreciate, and I always want to say somebody feed Phil. I was going to say everybody loves Phil, everybody feed Phil. Somebody feed Phil. I actually appreciate that on that show he sometimes references the fixers who are helping them out and will invite the fixer to enjoy whatever meal it is with them. And in case you don't know, a fixer is basically somebody who is local to a destination and will probably do some translation if that's necessary, plan the hotels, plan the experiences, just really make everything come together between the production crew, the host, and anything that they want to do that's local in that destination. So when we're seeing these shows and it feels like the host is getting this authentic, unique, incredible experience, they are, but it is thoroughly planned through. And I'm not saying you gotta go, the TV production route when planning your vacation, but I have found that when I thoroughly plan out my trips, it's alleviated all kinds of stress once I'm at the destination. Because what we don't see when we're watching these shows is all the logistics of, going from, the airport to your hotel, getting in between, can you walk? Is it safe to walk? Is it a car heavy city? Is it a lot of motorbikes? Do you have to like worry about that? If you have any kind of dietary restrictions, vegetarian, vegan, that kind of thing, or even allergens, where are you gonna eat? And if you just fly by the seat of your pants and you show up, these can be wildly stressful things to deal with on the fly, especially if you don't speak the local language. I can't imagine showing up into some of the places I've been around the world where I don't speak the language and just being like, I'm here, take me city, I shall go to my hotel now, and just expecting that everything's gonna happen for me. And I do actually think that a lot of Western travelers are guilty of this, of kind of thinking like, this place is so lucky to have us that they're gonna roll out the red carpet and everything will be taken care of, when in reality, that's just not the case. And even just think about things like with transportation. Sometimes, buying train tickets or bus tickets, things like that, have to be done in advance. And I'm thinking of traveling to Laos last year, and we took the high-speed train from Luang Prabang to Van Vieng, and then again to the capital. And you can just show up and buy tickets, but my understanding is that the tickets would often be sold out, especially like the day of travel. You can't just show up. You have to buy tickets in advance. But that's even true in Europe. I've spoken to a lot of people who would think that they know that Europe is generally known for having, a nice public transportation system, high-speed trains, all that stuff. And people will come from the US really excited to take advantage of that because in the US, we just don't have high-speed trains going around, much to my chagrin. But they'll show up and they'll think I'll just hop on the train, it'll be great. But oftentimes, especially in Germany, if you buy a last-minute high-speed train ticket, it can be wildly expensive. And then if you don't plan for that cost ahead of time, that can be stressful. But you can also avoid that cost if you're planning ahead of time. Now, I don't want to say that, when I thoroughly plan out my trips, I'm not basically on, an equivalent schedule of, people sign up for these group tours, and that's fine, not shaming that kind of travel, unless it's, disruptive to the local economy and culture and all that stuff. But a lot of people sign up for tours where everything is to the second planned. Cruise trips are like that, I think. I don't know. I've actually never gone on a massive cruise ship tour, and God help me, hopefully I will avoid that for the rest of my life. But a lot of those things are planned out to the minute, to the second. That's not what I do. I have a general plan of where we're gonna be every day. I might have information about transportation if that's needed, getting from place to place, so that I know I have to buy tickets in advance. I might have restaurants noted that I wanna go check out, whether it's for my own interest as a food writer and food filmmaker, or because I'm vegetarian and maybe I'm traveling to some place that isn't traditionally well known as a vegetarian vegan place to go. For example, I'm going to Japan in late October through mid-November, and I'm actually going to be writing about the vegan vegetarian food scene in Japan. But even before I knew I was going to be writing about that, I was doing some research into, where can I go to find vegetarian meals in Japan, because I've heard that can be a little bit challenging given, how much meat and fish is part of a regular diet there. But this isn't to say that I don't leave room for spontaneity. An example of that would be when I was in Hanoi, and this is in my Hanoi street food and just my regular Hanoi travel documentary, if you want to check that out, where we are going to a really old pagoda. Didn't look at the closing times, and it was basically on a siesta, a little break for lunch. And just around the corner, we found this really delicious vegan Vietnamese restaurant, and it was great. And that wasn't something that we planned. We had also figured out while planning that you can leave a lot of room for spontaneity in Hanoi because there's all kinds of restaurants. And doing a quick search, we saw that there are a lot of vegetarian vegan options. And having done the street food tour, we learned that you can often just go to a place and explain through lots of hand gestures or just looking up how to say, I'm vegetarian in Vietnamese, and sharing that with them, that you can be taken care of. But this is all information that I knew going into the trip, so that when we showed up, I wasn't stressing out over, where can we eat? How do we do this? How do we do that? It was all, pretty easy peasy. And there are all kinds of trip planning apps, programs out there. Some people can even go old fashioned and write it down, or a lot of people like using Google Excel. I've heard people have all kinds of Excel documents of all their previous trips saved. I like to use Notion. That's something that I've been using for the past year-ish or so. I had also been using something like Google Excel as well. But I like using Notion. I just find it easier to organize my trips along with everything else in my life because I use it to organize, production of YouTube videos, writing assignments, all that kind of stuff, as well as like year goals, life planning. And so then I just have like my little trip section, and I can open up Japan or North Macedonia, wherever I'm heading. I will generally have like a page for that, and I'll make it as detailed as I need it to be. I still go on trips where, I've been to the country enough where I feel like I don't really need to do any planning. I'll figure things out on the fly. Like, we spent a week in France recently for a family wedding. And because some of that was planned with family and some of it was we were on our own, and we got the ticket ahead of time, and that was about it. Pretty much everything else we did on the fly because we've been there enough. We know how things work for the most part from the traveler perspective. And so we didn't really feel like we needed to do a lot of planning. But when I'm going far, like thinking of like somebody from the US traveling to Europe, and if it's their first time here, I would definitely do a lot of planning. Make sure you know where you're going, how you're gonna get there. Is language gonna be a thing? Get your tickets for any intercity or international travel by train or even air if that's what you're doing in between different countries. Get those well ahead of time as soon as you can. I think generally speaking, it differs from different train operators, but you could find tickets like a good 3 months before that date. So actually for now, we're looking into possibly going back to Girona for the winter in Spain, and we're debating, do we take the train to do that? And we saw that the tickets with the French train that we would have to take in between to get through France, they seem to not open until 3 months before that travel date. So that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, whatever it is you use, I use Notion, whatever works for you. I would just consider doing some planning, or lots of planning actually, beforehand, but do leave room for spontaneity. And I know that doesn't sound romantic, doesn't sound sexy, it doesn't fit into like the romantic vision we have of the international traveler to say, I'm going to plan my spontaneity. But it's really not planning your spontaneity, it's being open to it. But you always have like the framework of what you've planned to fall back on in case of an emergency or you're just not sure what to do. So definitely a huge stress relief for me has been to plan out my trips beforehand. All right, now let's talk a little bit about the work equation. For number 2, clearly communicate out of office expectations. Now, I know I'm very fortunate that I live in Germany and holiday, vacation, whatever you want to call it, is sacrosanct here. So I've been fortunate that in most places I've worked where, unless it's like an earth-shattering emergency, you will not get contacted while on holiday. Holiday is truly sacrosanct, and people for the most part won't contact you. I do anecdotally think that that's changing. I think a little bit of the American work culture is kind of seeping into, especially the Berlin startup scene. I have noticed that some people will check messages or make themselves available while on holiday, and that's something that I don't love to see that, if I'm honest. I do think that, the older, the more traditional, I think generally Western European wide, France is definitely really good about this, but Germany historically was too, valuing vacation as a time that you are away from work and, you're not expected to check messages. So I'm coming from that context. I'm very lucky that for the most part, that's still a thing here. And I know in the US that, it's very easy rather to fire somebody. And so you feel like that constant pressure. I know I felt that way in the US, kind of feel this like low key constant pressure of if I don't constantly impress my boss, that they could just get rid of me. So I know that, take this all with a grain of salt. I still think that, what I'm about to share could be beneficial and helpful to alleviate that stress, to at least set yourself up for success while you're on vacation, and not necessarily to set yourself up for success, but rather to set yourself up for a stress-free, or at least more stress-free vacation than perhaps how you've been traveling before. And I think the key to that is clearly communicating your out-of-office expectations. So oftentimes what I would do is I would have like Notion again. I would have like a big document saying this is everything I'm working on. Here's everything that could possibly happen while I'm on vacation. Here's what to do if that happens. Here are people you need to contact if something comes up with this project. I just had everything, I think, well planned out. And I assume it was well planned out because nobody ever contacted me while I was on holiday for, an emergency related to something I was working on. So I think if you give people a heads up, like let them know well in advance, like these are the dates I'm going to be on holiday. I'll even add them, my vacation dates, to their calendar. It's like, this one I'm going to be out of office. If we have like a team vacation calendar, I would add my holiday to that as well so they could see. But definitely I would have on Google Calendar, add my vacation and copy like my main teammates, people who need to know. I would communicate that like office wide. Like the week of, I would say, I'm going to be on holiday on these dates. If you need anything before I go, please contact me ASAP. And I'm still talking a little bit about work. And I know that this is all easier said than done because, you know, I also want to do a good job in my work and I don't want to let people down. But it's helped me as I've gotten older to kind of understand that work is work, life is life, life is more important. Like I love this generally European idea that we work to live, we don't live to work here. And I think I've absorbed that for the most part. So, you know, I don't want to, you know, set my colleagues up for failure by kind of just being like, oh, I'm going on holiday, choose, bye, good luck with everything. I want to set them up for success as well. And I want to set myself up for avoiding a stressful vacation. But it's really helped me to internalize that this is just work. In the grand scheme of life, very little of what we're doing matters. I saw this cartoon on like TikTok or Instagram Reel that I think kind of summed this up perfectly. It was basically a bunch of cartoon characters sitting down to an office, getting ready for a meeting, and they said, before we start this meeting, I think it's important that before anybody gets heated, that we remind ourselves that literally none of this matters, so there's no need to get heated and get angry. None of this matters. That's, of course, you know, obviously I care about like what I'm doing right now, talking to you. I care about a lot of my projects, but it's kind of true a little bit. If you think about, you know, in the long grand scheme, very little of what we do matters or is worth feeling stressed about and having all those negative side effects related to stress. So just kind of internalizing that in the grand, like take a deep breath in the grand scheme. And this is all not even a blink of an eye. This is whatever the tiniest fraction of a blink of an eye is. You'll always have a chance to go back to the office and, you know, work on projects, do these things again and again and again, but you might not have another chance to drink wine in Bordeaux or to go hike Mount Fuji. That might be your only shot. So you don't want to go on vacation to some of these incredible places around the world and blow it because you're stressed about work. That in the grand scheme of things probably doesn't matter. Like, are you going to be thinking back on your life of, you know, like I said, hiking Mount Fuji or being in Nepal or going on safari in East Africa? Or are you going to think about, gosh, I really don't know if I nailed that project. John and Karen were giving me a little bit of a guff 40 years ago. Like, no, you're going to think about the incredible travel experiences you've had in your life and the connections you made while traveling. So I try to internalize that and remember that whenever I maybe get a little bit stressed or start thinking about work while I'm traveling. But again, I can generally avoid like work stress while on vacation if I set myself up for success, clearly communicate expectations, have that document for colleagues, and just try to stay in the moment while I'm traveling. Speaking of staying in the moment, something else that's really helped me is to sign up for a group tour. Because I'm vegetarian and I like writing about food, I often will sign up for group tours in different cities that are related to vegetarian food or just getting to taste some of the local cuisine. And this helps me because when you're on a group tour, it's kind of hard to think about work. You know, when I'm just traveling with my wife, Melanie, we can both fall into the trap of, you know, start talking about work or fetching about, oh, this is bothering me, whatever. And we have our little ways of trying to pull ourselves out of that to stay in the moment. But when you're on a group tour and you're talking to people, you know, maybe conversations come up and say, you know, what do you do for a living? I generally try to avoid that. I really like, I don't remember where I learned it, but I was reading something or saw something that was kind of indicating or promoting the idea of when you meet people to not go straight to, you know, what do you do for a living? What do you do for work? To try to get them to know them as people first. So that's what I try to do. But yeah, when you're in a group tour, sometimes that comes up with strangers. They ask, you know, what do you do for a living? What do you do for work? I try to just quickly change the topic to almost literally anything else. And so for the most part, when you're getting to know people, once you can get past that whole work question, you can't talk, you're not going to just drone on about your work problems, which is something that can happen from the comfort of a relationship having a partner. You can, use them as a sounding board or to kind of just kvetch about all the problems you're having at work. It's really obnoxious to do that. It can be obnoxious to do that to a partner too, but it's especially obnoxious to do that to a stranger that you're on a food tour with, for example. So I find that signing up for some tours locally, whether it's a food tour or some kind of, history city walking tour, it's a good way to avoid the stress of thinking about work back home or some of the other stresses related to travel while I'm on the trip. Although catch-22 for me is that a lot of this, like I just said, I'm going to Japan to write about vegan vegetarian food, so a little bit of a gray area for me. For most people who don't do this for part of their living, you can just sign up for a tour, enjoy that, be in the moment, and not stress out about anything else going on in your life. And of course, people that talk about the romanticism of being a traveler and not a tourist, that I have thoughts about that, maybe for a different video, but people want to be this traveler who interacts with the locals and gets to know the local community. And short of having a television show where you get a fixer to set that up and make it look like you just did it spontaneously, I do think signing up for small group tours. I'm not talking about like the gigantic things where you see people got the microphone and they literally look like a swarm of tourists coming into town. Pay a little extra if you can and get those small group tours so you get that intimacy of getting to know somebody who lives in this place and is passionate about whatever the topic is. And then you meet people who are more likely going to be like-minded, and you just have a much better experience. So I think you're more directly contributing to the local economy that way, as opposed to signing up for all these free tours where you just kind of pay whatever you want. I don't know, I feel a little icky about that. I do think signing up for a group tour is a great way to travel relatively stress-free and also to contribute positively to the place that you're visiting. Now again, back to the work side of the equation. For number 4, delete office distractions from your phone. My friend, you are on vacation. You don't need Slack, you don't need Teams, you don't need your office Gmail on your phone popping up, giving you distracting notifications. I read the stat about how many people get disruptions while on vacation. I do think the primary blame is on the colleague, whoever's bothering you, but also you can, again, set yourself up for having a stress-free vacation by deleting those notifications and letting your colleagues know up front, like, hey, I'm deleting Slack, I'm deleting Teams, so I'm going to be off the grid. And that's you can do that so you don't feel that temptation of checking, because what always happens is you see the little notification on the app, oh, I got one, oh, it's just one message. I'll check, and you justify it because you'll say, oh, this will just be one thing off my plate, so I'm not stressed when I come back. Because that is also a big problem, is people have the stress of when they come back to work and feeling overwhelmed. So you see one, oh, maybe 2 notifications, I'll check that. But then inevitably you're seeing, oh, what's happening in this conversation? Oh, what's happening over there? Oh, I don't remember that happening. And then you go to your email, and then suddenly you're in your hotel when you should be out enjoying whatever destination you're at. And I know some people might not want to actually delete the app, but you can do things like remove them from your home screen. My wife has me do this sometimes. You can put them in a folder on your phone somewhere where they don't typically, you got that muscle memory with your thumbs, so put it someplace that they don't typically look. And obviously, you can search within your phone to find the app again if you want, but just adding that little bit of friction, I think, helps to remind yourself, like, wait, no, what am I doing? Why am I opening Slack? Because I've been guilty of that myself, where I just am in the habit, because I would, and this probably isn't a great thing, but I would check Slack like while I'm at the gym. Like I would go to the gym for my lunch hour, and I would just instinctively check Slack, even though I shouldn't be, because that's my time off. See, I'm not perfect either. I screw this up too. You have that muscle memory for checking messages, and you could be in a similar environment in which you would have that muscle memory, kind of like a Pavlov's dog kind of thing, triggered, and find that you're doing that. But if you just move your apps to a different folder or have somebody else do that, or like I said, delete them, that could be one way to build some friction in having access to those things. Now, of course, if you don't want to delete them, you don't have to delete them. I find that, moving things away and adding that friction helps me. but I just please at least turn off notifications so you don't see those little tempting notification badges on your phone. If you could at least just move them off the home screen, turn off the notifications, because inevitably if you got those things, you see the little red number popping up, or you see the notifications coming down when you're at the pool or whatever. Even if you don't check the message, you're thinking about it. Work takes up enough of our brain space in life that it does not deserve a second of your time while you're on vacation. So even if you allow that little bar to come down at the top of your iPhone or whatever you have, and you see the subject line, that's taking some space in your vacation, in your brain, and all it takes is like the wrong word to get you to think like, "Ooh, I gotta open that." Like, "Oh, it's gonna bother me more if I don't open it." And you find ways to justify it, but really at the end of the day, like I said before, it's just work. Live your life, turn off these notifications, and enjoy your vacation. All right, my last tip on how to stop wasting your time on vacation is travel less. Now, I know that might sound a bit like an oxymoron, like, we're talking about travel here. Most likely, if you're watching this, you enjoy traveling and you want to do it more, not less. When I say travel less, I don't mean necessarily travel less in your entire life, but travel less when you're at your destination. I get the inclination to travel as much as you can. My first time in Europe, to try to make a long story short, I had traveled abroad and lived abroad briefly in northern India while I was in college, and that's what gave me the travel bug. Spent some time in India and Thailand as well on that trip. It was my first time outside of North America. I'd only been to Canada beforehand. That's what got me the travel bug. And then I kind of slipped into normal early 20s life, job and focusing on my career and future and all that. And I got to this point where I would realize, I hadn't traveled, and at the time it must have been like a good 3-4 years since that India trip. And, privilege noted that, to even think about being able to travel internationally again is a big privilege. So noted, but for me, that's something I love so much, and I really had that bug and I wanted to do more. I said, I am going to travel abroad. I almost didn't care where it was, but I knew I really wanted to go to Europe. I remember looking up the flights. Aer Lingus saw Ireland was the most affordable place to fly to from Cleveland at that time. And so I, some buddies planned a 10-day trip to Ireland. And during those 10 days, we were traveling not every day, but at least every other day. And often sometimes, again, on the same day, we would do some kind of big trip. I remember it was basically like, landing in Dublin, immediately taking a bus to Belfast because we really wanted to see some of Northern Ireland and Belfast, and then come back down to Dublin where we went to the Cliffs of Moher, Galway. So we really saw a lot. And on paper, somebody might see that and be like, "Oh, you saw a lot. That sounds like a great trip. Like, let me see that itinerary. You got the Google Doc, the Google Excel for that trip? Because I would love to recreate it." Love that trip, and actually it is one of the reasons that I kind of went down this route of wanting to live in Europe. It was my first time on a train, for example, so it really did mean a lot to me. And I get why the inclination for Americans like myself when I was younger then, or still for people who don't get to go travel very much, I get the inclination to fit in as much as possible. We already talked about how we don't generally get much vacation time, and when we do get vacation time, we feel guilty about taking it. Then when we do take it, we feel worried about work. So there are all sorts of problems related to it that I'm not going to be able to solve instantly, but I can share what works for me and hope that it helps you a little bit. So I get that inclination of wanting to squeeze in as much as possible, but anybody who's done that, and I'm telling you that I've done it, that it just creates a lot more stress while you're traveling. Because if you are busy at home, maybe you're not doing all the trip planning that you should be, like I was suggesting before. And so then maybe you're going to all these places, you've got your bag and hopping on these different modes of transportation. Oh, where are we going again? What are we doing? Do we have to be at this place at this time? And it can be stressful. And then you come back exhausted, and then you go back to your job, and then the stress of having to get back to your job, it's a lot. So if you travel less in the destination you're going to, that at least for me has alleviated a lot of the stress related to going on vacation, trip planning, all those things. And this whole like travel less once we're in the destination thing is something that I've at least really embraced over, I want to say, the past few years. Like in February 2023, our big trip of the year was going to Southeast Asia. And on paper, we did go to a lot, and I'm very grateful for that trip. It was like 2 weeks or maybe a little bit more than 2 weeks. We went to Hanoi, Ninh Bình, both in Vietnam, then Luang Prabang, Van Vienne, then down to Vientiane, the capital, for one night before flying to Bangkok for the rest of the trip. And in some cases, we did break our rule of traveling too close to being in a destination, but just because of how the trains worked out. But for the most part, we instead of going to what I probably would have done in the past, like within about a week or so of being in Vietnam, of going to like maybe 3 or 4 places, we only really went to 2 places. And that might not seem like a lot if you're traveling overseas, you want to see more, but because we spent more time in Hanoi and in Ninh Bình than maybe I would have in the past, we got to see more of those areas and not feel like we were rushing around so much to see everything. Because, of course, Hanoi is massive and Ninh Bình is a small rural area, but there's still lots of things nearby to see. And to see it all in one day or in a day and a half, it's exhausting. And you're coming off of the inevitable jet lag, being in a different culture, not speaking the language, all these other little things that can be stressful. So you really want to like plan it out so that you allow for these other things that can be stressful to be not as stressful because you're not rushing to get to the next place. Just enjoy more things around in the area. And I found sometimes, when you stay at the same hotel for a little bit longer, you have nice moments where you get to know the staff a little bit, or you're having some nice conversations that you probably wouldn't have if you're just, dropping your bags and then hurry up and getting off to the whatever tour you signed up for. You're like, I gotta put my bags on, I gotta get my camera, I gotta run out and start taking pictures. And and I feel like a lot of times people take so many pictures because they've rushed their trip so much that it's the only way that they're gonna remember it, because they're unable to kind of sit still for a second and enjoy what they're seeing and what they're doing in the moment. They gotta take pictures because they gotta look back, oh yeah, we did go do that. Don't remember it, but I got the picture, so I guess that was worth thousands of dollars. And we like that form of kind of slowing down when we travel someplace so much that we did it even more in this past big trip back in February, March to Kenya, where we really only went to Nairobi, we went to Tsavo National Park, and then we went up to E10 for the running camp. 3 places in a little over 2 weeks. And I'm sure a lot of people think that it sounds nuts. And again, I'm coming from, privilege noted. I'm coming from, Germany, where we have a lot of holiday and it's generally seen as sacrosanct. I get all that, and I get coming especially from a place like the US where, a 2-week vacation might not be possible. But then I would say if your options, at least for me, this is me, if my options were either a 10-day vacation or a week vacation where I have to run around and bounce around to everything, traveling far away, like someplace like Kenya from the United States or Vietnam, something like that, or staying in the Americas where, shorter travel, less of an adjustment in terms of jet lag, and I can make the most of it, I would probably travel less in that sense, not travel as far from home, until I would, probably also make it a career goal that I get to a point where I can make my own schedule. So I think we need to think about, how much are we actually going to enjoy it if we fly across the world and jam pack a lot of stuff in and just feeling like we need to bounce around to a bunch of places rather than maybe not flying as far away and getting to enjoy our time there a bit more. But if you are in a position where you can, have a 2-week vacation, I still think that traveling less while in the destination like we did in Kenya is a great option. I will admit that had we not done the running camp, we probably would have gone to maybe 1 or 2 other places, but the running camp necessitated that we be in one place the whole time. But still, it's not like I feel like I didn't really get to see Kenya very much because of how we did it. We saw Nairobi, we got to see the city life, we did safaris, went to a national park, and we got to enjoy a part of Kenyan culture that's probably the most famous aspect about it, the running culture. I honestly can't ask for a whole lot more. And the last thing I'll say about traveling less while you're in a destination is that I think it opens up the possibility that you're going to get yourself to more off the beaten path destinations. And if we're kind of tying everything together, you know, the romanticism of how Bourdain travels and, you know, people wanting to replicate that and go to off the beaten path destinations, again, like I said, fixers galore. There's a lot of people making that kind of stuff happen and research involved in making that happen. But if you travel less while you're in a destination, you can have those conversations with hotel staff. And this is what I talked about before in terms of planning your spontaneity. Like if you say I'm going to be in a place for 2 days, 3 days, instead of just a day and a half where I need to run in and out, you could leave time open and be like, oh, on this day, and this is what we've done. Be like, on our second day in Hanoi, for example, we're not going to plan anything. And then maybe we ask the hotel staff, oh, what's your favorite restaurant? Or what would you check out? What would you recommend? And then that might send us to some off the beaten path places. I can think of when we were in El Salvador and we had a few days in El Tunco and we really got to know the hotel staff quite a bit. And a Swiss woman who married a Salvadoran man introduced us to the Salvadoran's cousin who took us on this wonderful hike and to someplace that I would have never found this in my trip planning, or if I just showed up and kind of flew by the seat of my pants. But we plan our trips in a way and we travel in a way to allow the possibility, a greater chance of the possibility to find these off the beaten path destinations. And if you also enjoy traveling off the beaten path, then you're gonna wanna watch this video where I share some of my top tips to get off the tourist trek and, you know, travel off the beaten path. See you there.